Hello and welcome to Breaking Ground on iPropertyRadio with myself, Carol Tallon, the show where we chat to industry experts to get a view on what's happening on the ground and to learn about new trends emerging within the construction industry. This show is brought to you in partnership with Place Engage, a data-driven platform for more successful public consultation and community engagement for your next development project. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Emer Byrne, Chartered Surveyor, Chair of the SCSI Sustainability Working Group and lecturer within TU Dublin, lecturing on valuation, real estate and sustainability. Emer, you're very welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Carol, thank you very much for inviting me. It's an absolute privilege to be on this show with you, where you're interviewing people who I've learned so much from over the years. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
You know, Emer, you are so welcome. And I'm so glad that you're learning from people I interview, because I am always learning from the people I interview as well. And, you know, in fact, before we started recording, I just mentioned there that, you know, there are some things that I just wouldn't be aware of. You know, sometimes we know people's job title, but we don't understand what it is, the work that they do.
Sure.
And actually, similarly, you and I had a conversation weeks ago, and I learned about a project that you're doing within the college that I got very excited about, and that's what I want to talk about today. So I mentioned there that in addition to being a chartered surveyor and chair of the SCSI Sustainability Working Group, you are also a lecturer in TU Dublin. And while sustainability falls under that, you're also working across valuations and real estate. And one of the projects that you mentioned to me that I was really intrigued by and, you know, potentially excited for the future of the industry was a collaborative project where you're bringing together property economic students together with architectural students. And anybody who's worked in industry for a long time knows that actually when you try to bring kind of maybe engineering students with architectural students or with property economic students, you know, they're generally looking at possibly the same projects, but through a very different lens. And, you know, design thinking workshops have been implemented to solve the problem of trying to understand the different lenses, maybe that the different disciplines necessarily look through for projects. And it's the reason why we need multidisciplinary teams to deliver great projects. But you have to learn, as a multidisciplinary team, you have to learn how to work with the other disciplines. And that's not something that's really been done formally. So you might just talk to us about that particular project.
Gosh, you're spot on, Carol. And I'll be honest, it was intimidating embarking on this project because many property people are frustrated architects, I'll be honest, and we all love the world of design. Even looking at your background here, I'm excited to see all the new projects that are coming on stream. We have a beautiful city. And the architects were equally slightly curious, I'm going to put it that way, about meeting the surveying profession in terms of end value. And we all sat down and said, well, where can I be of use to you in this project? So just briefly to put context on the project, Carol, we usually work, myself and my colleague Lena Clark, on a fourth year project. It's an integration of many of the subjects we do on the property economics program, and it's a final second semester. So this is the final if you like, stage of the course. So what we look at is trying to take all the learnings, Carol, from the course and put them together in a very challenging project, almost like they're out in the workplace as they're doing the project. And we're very, very fortunate to have a huge support from Bannon, who have been supporting us for years in this fourth year final project, and also from Irish Life, who are partners in this project as well. So they would provide what I would call the case study project. And the case study project in this particular case was a building on the cusp of either redevelopment, retrofit, or potentially retaining as is and doing nothing. So they were our three options that we put to our surveying students. However, the beauty with this case study was we had been approached by the School of Architecture under the umbrella of building change. The School of Architecture develops this focus on the Sustainable Development Goals 13.1, which is called Climate Action, 13.3 should I say, and Affordable Sustainable Housing under 11.1. And under that, their remit is to create an atmosphere that students develop their knowledge, skills and mindset to address sustainability challenges faced by society. And in that and under that umbrella, they had an opportunity to get some funding under the Demolition Takedown Project, which is a creative climate action Government of Ireland funded project. And with Miriam Delaney in the School of Architecture, Kieran and Laura in building under the Demolition Takedown Project, we were approached to collaborate. And when I say collaborate now, we thought this was going to be very easy. Well, it was a challenge on its own, even just to get the module timetable lined up, Carol. So this is a fundamental thing we need to look at in the college. But that's on the challenges to be learned. On the very positive side, the students in the second semester, both fourth year students in architecture and fourth year students in TU Dublin, were absolutely thrilled to meet each other. They really were. We had a chance to workshop for a few hours on 2 or 3 occasions. We had a chance to look at the case study building and really interrogate what could we do here that retains embodied carbon, that looks at the best and optimized use of this building, this challenging case study for the good of society. And we, as property economics students, look at value. We look at end value. We look at feasibility. And the architecture students were really curious to see that came into play, because their focus was obviously design and how they would maximize and optimize the building, how they would create something that we would like to interact in out of the raw materials on site. Now, as it happened, the students, when they learned what architects look at, they sat back and our property surveying students said, I had no idea we could do that with that building. Wow, isn't that incredible? The feasibility on creative side fused beautifully with the feasibility on the financial side. The students loved it, Carol. They loved getting to know each other, and the outcome was so much richer for that collaboration. The feedback has been phenomenal from the staff, the students, and also from the support team. We had Irish Life and Bannon's, and myself and Lena, my colleague, we were just blown away with the final presentations on their findings. So if that's not too much detail, I hope I've got.
No, actually, I'd actually like a little bit more detail, because when you describe, first of all, you're taking people through a almost theoretical approach that actually within months, they'll actually have to go into that, because projects don't get delivered in isolation, that it is this multidisciplinary approach. But when you talk about a building on the cusp, that actually potentially describes 500,000 buildings in Ireland. So one of the stats I was reading in the last couple of weeks is that we have 500,000 buildings that are in line for retrofitting.
Correct.
And we're only about 18,000 of the way into that. So actually, where does that leave us? And it's more than just retrofitting and future-proofing these buildings from a sustainability point of view, but also from a usability and livability point of view, because the future of work is yet to be mapped. So what kind of building was this that you were working on?
It's one of those 1970 type buildings, red brick, very low floor to ceiling height, 2.4 meters, and also didn't occupy the full of the site. So essentially the site was predominantly car parking, flat surface car parking. So on that particular aspect alone, we looked at the redevelopment being more appropriate in this case, with reuse of materials on the site in some possibility of retaining the embodied carbon there. But typically that 1970s building, if you like, that style or that type of structure is adaptable. if the full of the site was occupied by the building, then a much more interrogated use of the structure that was there would have been warmly received across the board. As you know, iProperty are doing a big job on A&L Goodbody on the North Docks there. Very similar, that approach to taking the building, maybe raising the height of the building and using the site in the most, in optimizing the site as it stands. Now, as it happens, that North Docklands building would be a lot younger than this particular building that we were interrogating. However, it's highly realizable in terms of working with an architectural team, looking at how we can maximize the floor to ceiling height, maybe removing the suspended ceiling tiles and getting that extra depth, if you like, and feeling of space within the building. So
I love the idea of the knowledge exchange, though, in terms of the multidisciplinary approach. So just from your observation, maybe not necessarily what was documented, but from your observation, what do you think the architectural students learned from the property economics students?
Oh, this is really lovely. They loved the fact that you could put an end value and a feasibility around the product. They had not embraced cost and values before. It never came into their education up to that point. So it very much enhanced their understanding of what they're doing and why they would do it. And also enhanced their understanding of what becomes a project, a live project, that the realism of the architect being supportive to the client is one side of it in terms of design and creativity, but equally that the client has a list of requirements. And in this case, if we were to model the client and being an institution or a fund, that institution or fund has to go back to its shareholders and it has to make sense. And the architects really learned how much sense a project has to make before it gets put onto the to-do list.
When you talk about realism and sense, did they see this initially as a limitation?
That's a very good question. Their creative sides, yes. I mean, let's be honest, they want to create. As we walk them through, well, we could use your design focus and creativity in a way that actually optimizes our end goal, which is to have, if you like, a best-in-class retrofitted building. Then they became more alive to it. Then they became much more alert to, well, look, actually, yeah, we can do this. An architect seems to love nothing more than constraints on sites. And if this is introduced as a constraint on budget plus site, then that also becomes more interesting for them. I thought that they did enjoy that process of opening up their minds. And equally, by the end of the process, Carol, to answer your question, they weren't intimidated by it. No, yeah. They were actually enhanced.
I love the way you say that, because actually I've never heard that articulated before, but as you say it, suddenly it makes sense in the context of every architect I've dealt with over the last 20 odd years. Architects do love constraints. You would imagine that they wouldn't, but you're right, they do. They just like having to find a creative solution to a problem.
Yeah, that's right. They love it. Give them a greenfield site and they'll not run a mile, but they'll kind of go, right, okay, that's almost egotistic. Maybe a constraint around a brownfield site with very limitations gives them a chance to really bring out, as you've identified, that creative gene. And equally, this is adding another layer to that. We're saying, look, we really want to retain this building, or I think they also, in the end of this particular project, 90% of the groups decided it needed to be redeveloped because of the flexibility to do something creative in the entire site. Having said that, the architects also came up with the solution of leaving that as is and using the rest of the site to create another opportunity there. So there was a lot we learned as property surveyors in not throwing everything out and starting fresh, that the constraints element can also push us to create an opportunity for optimizing value, and value to the client, value to the shareholders, value to the I suppose if we're looking at it with our sustainability lens, value to our community around retaining embodied carbon. Yeah.
It's interesting there that you say kind of maybe up to 90% of the students were in favour of redevelopment. Of the 10% who weren't, was there a split between the property economics and the architecture side?
Actually, the reason I suppose there was a 90% is that was down to the site size in that particular case. It would have been much higher if the site was much more limited. I think we would have had maybe the other way, where we would have had 80 to 90% want to retain it. So of the 10% that really hung on to the site as it stands, yeah, I think that idea of losing the embodied carbon was so strongly held in their mindset, and indeed in their experience. So and that was split evenly between the architects and the surveyors. So, it was dependent on their perception really of what we're doing with this building in its final, I suppose, entity. What was it going to look like? We want to retain this. So,
and actually, I think that's an interesting one around the embodied carbon there, because actually just this weekend, I was moderating. I was hosting an event on rural homes delivery, and I know we had a panelist from the Irish Green Building Council, and they were repeating the phrase, which I myself have repeated so often as well, that the most sustainable building is the one that has already been built. But I suppose I wanted to challenge that a little bit to say, actually, do we know that? Does the data actually tell us that? Or is this something that we probably need to figure out on a project by project basis, looking at the cash cost, the carbon cost, the situation? Have we gone past the day where we can flippantly say the most sustainable building is the one that's already been built?
I think you're absolutely right to interrogate that, Carol. I'm so glad you asked that. In this particular case, it wasn't. It's not, because of the site and the opportunity to do something that, for want of a better expression, had more future life in it. If we called it, this building was guts of 50 years old. And if we want to create buildings with longevity, then at some point you've got to look at the value to the future. This building was falling off in terms of economic, functional and environmental obsolescence. So it was going down that curve into obsolescence. It needed work and time anyway, and some investment. It's a question of, do you invest to get another 5-10 years? And do you meet all the criteria of the legislation that's coming down the tracks at us? Worthy legislation, by the way, not crying out against the legislation. Or do you look at a building that can retain life in the building for at least 50 years, if not a longer period of time, and really look at materials that go into this next iteration? Look at the longevity, look at sustainable materials, look at using some of the materials that have come off the site as it stands, or at the very least, look at the materials that you're definitely committing to. And I think there's an opportunity there. So, Carol, that's a great question. And I think that many businesses and investment, I suppose investment opportunities are looking at that now. Where do we cut that? And I think a 20-year-old building, I think there's an opportunity 20 to 30 years. Even longer, but maybe buildings and typologies that were 1930s, there's something in them as well to really look at retaining those structures. It depends on the quality of the building in the 1960s and 70s that was constructed, and it very much depends on maybe the site they occupy as well, not just from the investor's perspective, but also from the community perspective. Is it close to public transport, where we can really leverage that site to maybe creating housing plus mixed use offices, retail, whatever, some kind of medical use there with housing, could be a nice mix. That sort of interrogation is hugely important. And I don't know that the architects saw the use factor as having, an impact, because we have to look where the market's going as well. So there's the market, the sustainability, there's retention of existing materials. There's a whole suite of considerations that go into a good decision. And good decision making is based on, as you pointed out in the beginning there, evidence. Let's look at the numbers. Let's gather more evidence.
Yeah, I think around sustainability, though, it has been difficult to look at the numbers. And for the last number of years, since about 2015, 16, we've been working on the PropTech side with innovators, technology innovators who want to leverage existing and emerging technologies to be able to better measure, to be able to better capture. And one of the things that I've been really vocally critical of are some of the paid for certifications, because they were based on really nice, well-written submissions. And as somebody who was paid to ghostwrite some of those submissions, sure, I know they were based on nice ghostwritten submissions. Whereas actually, that shouldn't be the basis of certification. If we want to understand how a building performs, it has to be data-driven, which means it has to be something has to be monitored. It has to be the right data that we're looking at. I mean, to be honest, I'm not sure we've even reached a point where we can agree on the right KPIs, the right things to be measured. Well, now suddenly we have this huge pool of data that we never had before, and a lot of it is dumb data. I'm not sure that we've really gotten to the point of being very smart about our data in sustainability at all. And I think you're uniquely positioned in an Irish context because you're teaching this to the next generation of talent, but you're also the chair of the SCSI Sustainability Working Group. So you're actually helping guide to understand what is best practice, but actually maybe help to future-proof not just the knowledge of the industry, but actually the future of our buildings. That's a really, that's a huge, that's a huge gap between those two. How do you marry those?
With difficulty. I'd say the good thing about the position within the college is we're learning, both as students and as academics, and also within the SCSI, they are constantly learning. So the whole idea of where we go next is exactly what you've identified there: KPIs, data, and pool of data. And the remit for the next year is actually a meaty report that interrogates the data that's needed for the industry. So you've hit the nail on the head in our next step. How we go about that is very simply, we have a lot of the multidisciplinary members on our sustainability working group. We've the QSs, geosurveyors, building surveyors. We have the full spectrum, and indeed the commercial agents and valuers that I'm more familiar with. And that also allows us to see in a multidisciplinary working group the challenges across the disciplines, just as you've identified with the architecture students in TU Dublin. We're similarly challenged across the profession to meet and discuss what is it that we need. What is that part of us that wants to know more, but where do we get the data? There's a project called the Enact project, and I think you might be aware of that, Carol. We've talked about this before. It looks at retrofitting and the challenges around retrofitting commercial buildings. So that's an ongoing project with the SCSI, Irish Green Building Council, and ATU. So there's that type of material is being interrogated, but the data and the gathering of data is something that we take very seriously and is our next step to produce some data-driven reports that the industry can actually leverage and use for their day-to-day jobs. We're not looking to change the earth over 1 year, but we're looking to do exactly as you've identified there, find out more information and get the data that is needed. Find out where the buildings in use are really leveraging their energy. What are they doing? There's some very good examples out there with Hibernia and iPut in terms of you really looking at the energy in use piece now. You mentioned about the certification there earlier in your question. Certification is only as good as the day it's handed over. We're really moving into now where and how we use our buildings when we have them taken over. You might have a lovely A, B, or an A3, but if you're only utilising your building management system on a sporadic basis where you're not maximising and optimising energy savings, then you might as well not have the A-rated building in the first instance. So we're trying to map and go back to look at what helps the building management systems operators to optimize their energy savings. What is it that we need to be looking at? And I think sometimes it's looking at best in class and seeing what their lessons are. And they're usually very willing to share because we're all on this learning curve. So I've as chair of the working group, we tap into those best in class, and we have on the working group John Cairns in Hibernia. We've Shane Caldwell, head of sustainability in iPut, Christina Browich, building surveyor, head of KRA renewables. So we have excellent talent and on the working group team, and that's just mentioning a few, but we have all of the members of the working group bring something to the table that is very valued and needed.
Yeah, and the part I assume part of the work of the working group is to make sure that all insights then make their way across the industry. So from the industry's perspective, in addition to, obviously educating themselves and upskilling themselves, how can members of the industry contribute to the work you're doing?
Well, I mentioned with yourself, Carol, prior to the call, that there's always a need for good case study examples. Case studies are the way we learn. If case studies are explored and interrogated, we can share these. A very good example of this might be we were going to do evaluation CPD workshop on this week, on the Thursday this week with the SCSI Sustainability Working Group. So what we're doing, myself and the team, we're interrogating the valuation approach, literally breaking it down and showing members how to go about a very simple valuation, whereby we take that 70s or 80s or 90s building and we're looking at retrofitting it. What do we do? So that's a very good example of a case study that we show people based on what we've learned in case studies in a generic way, the how-to. To take in these examples, we're very open to anonymizing the data and making sure that it's just the lessons learned, Carol. If industry collaborators are willing to share this information and data for the good of the learnings, and they want to share the real data, we're fine with that, absolutely. But it's mainly around, as you identified, trying to pull the data and information together. Equally in the college, we love when we work with partners like Bannon and Irish Life and Cushman & Wakefield and CBRE and all the various companies, we tend to work with them based on what they can bring in terms of real data, real information, real case study buildings, real leases, real numbers, so that our students are getting a richer experience of what's reality out there. And in terms of the industry, then the industry know when they have been sharing this data that the students are emerging into the marketplace with a sense of reality under their belt, as opposed to maybe a slightly more theoretical version of what the working world is about. So in both cases, what we're very interested in hearing for on the SCSI side is case studies, examples, and working with industry partners. They don't have to be surveyors. They can be across the industry. We are really happy to take any information or any conversation and take it further. We're constantly, as you're doing here, Carol, talking and learning. That's what we're doing. And in the college, equally, we'd be keen to look at more case study examples, tours, site visits. All of this helps to make for a more rounded end student going out into an industry that's really grappling with this challenge.
You know, it's amazing. Actually, it seems like a really powerful thing that that industry individual members can do to actually benefit a benefit that they'll get a direct benefit from this in terms of not just the talent coming out, but also actually improving the knowledge overall. And I think it's maybe worth repeating that. I mean, you touched on maybe some of the support from Bannon and Irish Life, but maybe just to touch on the fact that TU Dublin, that there you are indeed open to industry partnerships for innovation and research, because there's a really exciting opportunity now. And I mean, as I know from my days in innovation and trying to connect industry with academia, it always comes down to the problem. And one great thing about the construction and real estate industry is that we know we're not going to run out of problems to solve. There are many problems to solve. So just to reiterate that the university or the TU Dublin, that you are indeed open to industry partnerships for innovation and research. Emer, I could talk to you all day about the work that you're doing. I definitely want to pick this conversation up again. I think it's brilliant, the real life experience that you're giving your students there, and particularly bringing that multidisciplinary approach, because quite frankly, that's something that long experienced people in the industry are struggling with right now. So actually that's a skill set that the next generation of talent coming into the industry will have, that maybe long experienced members of the industry won't have. So really well positioned.
No, absolutely. Well, I mean, it's Ara Walsh and Shane Caldwell in iPut took the bull by the horns in the first semester in our final year and did exactly what you suggested there. They just pushed the students to their limit in terms of again a case study project, in saying, look, you might as well be out working. I'm going to push you here. And the students, again, like you've said there, they thrived on it. Nothing was all 100% right, and nothing ever is, but they thrived on what you've just identified there, is being pushed by industry, for industry, and ultimately with that whole sustainability lens on it. We couldn't have run the project without that level of support. It's incredible now, really, what the industry have put forward now in terms of the level of genuine time they give is very important to us, but very important to the next generation. Just if
it is, and remember, to complete that cycle, that means it's very important to those companies, because they're the people who leverage that talent. So it really is the circle of learning, and starting it there is super.
You've laid.
Keep up the good work. It's amazing what you're doing, and certainly we would be so happy to call out to the industry if there's any way that they can contribute in terms of presenting problems or presenting buildings that might be suitable for case studies. Then absolutely to reach out and do that. That's all we've time for today. My huge thanks to Emer Byrne, Chartered Surveyor and Chair of the Sustainability Working Group, and indeed lecturer within TU Dublin, dealing with valuations, real estate and sustainability. My thanks as always to show producer Katie Tallon and to the production team at Hear Me Roar Media. Finally, word of thanks to Place Engage for making these conversations possible, and indeed to you for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next episode of Breaking Ground. In the meantime, please be sure to check out all of the other Irish and international real estate and construction shows here on iPropertyRadio.com.